Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh and you're watching AWANI International. Here are our top stories for tonight. The government mulls special package for businesses in anticipation of US tariffs, and markets dip ahead of trade talks with S&P 500 snaps win streak. More on this after this. Here are our top stories. We start with US markets under pressure as investors eye the looming Federal Reserve meeting and growing trade tensions. The S&P 500 fell 0.6% on Monday, snapping its 9-day winning streak, the longest in 2 decades. Meanwhile, the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite dropped 0.7%, while the Dow slipped 0.2%. Investor sentiment took a hit after 2 announcements from President Donald Trump. First, a plan to impose a 100% tariff on foreign-made movies. Several movie and television production stocks fell sharply right after this announcement, but subsequently part losses. The second, Trump said he has no plans to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week, adding to the uncertainty surrounding trade talks. Markets have been volatile since Trump's first round of tariff announcements on April 2nd, though both he and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent say they expect trade deals could come as early as this week. Next up, US President Donald Trump says that both Moscow and Kiev want to settle the war in Ukraine. He says the recent fall in the price of oil may actually incentivize Russian President Vladimir Putin to move the needle. The price of oil has fallen around $15 a barrel since the start of the year. OPEC Plus has announced a significant production boost, even as concerns over excess supply and the impact of Trump's trade war on global demand continue to mount. On Saturday, 8 member countries agreed to raise output by an additional 411,000 barrels per day in June. Oil and gas revenues are a significant portion of Russia's budget, accounting for nearly 30% of Russia's budget in January and February, according to government data cited by Bloomberg. This makes Russia vulnerable to changes in global oil prices, as major drops could put pressure on Russia's finances, already faced with increasing military spending. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, the government is weighing a special incentive package for businesses hit by US tariffs, but only after assessing the full impact. Investment, Trade and Industry Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz says the government will focus on reciprocal negotiations with the US starting today, with the goal of avoiding tariffs, especially in key sectors.
So far, a 10% basic tariff has been imposed, but not all industries are affected. Hence, Tengku Zafrul said the government would need to determine who needs support and how. Tengku Zafrul also noted that any incentive plan would need to be reviewed with the Finance Ministry, given its impact on Malaysia's fiscal position. It was revealed during yesterday's special parliamentary meeting on US tariffs that virtual negotiations will be led by MITI's Deputy Secretary General, Mastura Ahmad Mustafa, and the US Trade Representative for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, Sarah Elliman. The two sides will work to define the scope and technical issues in hopes of striking a win-win deal.
We'll go for a quick break. More on US tariff trade war after this.
Berita hebat untuk pelanggan Astro. Kini anda boleh stream Prime Video di Astro tanpa charge tambahan untuk 2 bulan.
I will not leave them.
Hiburan tanpa henti dengan blockbuster global.
Aku diraja. Ia berunda.
K-shows terhangat.
You only bohong.
Amazon Original.
Amen.
Dan sensasi tempatan. Prime Video. Terbaik dengan Astro. Nikmati akses selama 2 bulan tanpa charge tambahan.
This year marks 50 years of diplomatic ties between China and the European Union. but the milestone is passing with little celebration. Relations have cooled in recent years, strained by disputes over Chinese EV subsidies and Beijing's stance on the war in Ukraine. Still, in an era of shifting US foreign policy under Donald Trump, Beijing and Brussels may be quietly reassessing their strategic footing. To unpack where this complex relationship stands and where it might go, we're joined by Julia Rocknefit from Taylor's University. Thank you so much for joining us, Julia. Right.
Pleasure being with you.
Right. Julia, 50 years on, how would you characterize the relationship today? Has it evolved more as a strategic partnership or remained a transactional necessity at this point?
If we take an objective look at China-EU relations, we can observe that it has been a relationship mainly focused around trade and economic relations, and probably the key words here will be economic relations and pragmatism. And it's not due to any ideological considerations that this relationship has been prospering. As in 1975, exactly 50 years ago, when this relationship was established, the European countries were capitalist democracies, and China was and remains, at least politically, a communist country. However, the trade volume rose significantly from 2.4 billion US dollars to 785.6 in 2024 since the start. So it's quite significant, right? And this also reflects the mutually beneficial nature of this relationship. With China's still low cost of workforce, rapid industrialization, which was able to deliver a sophisticated output and also allowed European countries to offshore their production while still keeping the prices for consumers low at the domestic markets. And today, China still remains second largest trading partner for the EU, while being the major source of imports to the EU and also largest export market.
Right. But do you think, given all the uncertainty around US foreign policy, especially in recent years, do you think China and the EU are trying to find more common ground on their own?
They probably are. And it also is probably coming out of necessity rather than any ideological approximation or being a buddy-buddy in the international politics. Indeed, Trump's trade policies, they are pushing EU to embrace China, pragmatically, at least in terms of developing economic relationship, but also with Trump's administration going against some very important values in the international system, like sovereignty. Remember his claim for Greenland, his intention to take Greenland from Denmark. This also doesn't make the American EU partners happy. So inevitably, it will be pushing EU with the time, probably not immediately, because the ideological component of the EU-American, the transatlantic cooperation is still there. It will be pushing it towards China. And part of it might be under the pressure from the United States. For example, the EU will be buying laundered goods, which will be coming from China, but through the third countries. This might be happening.
Right. I mean, it's definitely an interesting time to see American relationships with regards to the EU and China as well, to really assess where they are right now. So looking ahead, is there still meaningful room for cooperation between China and the EU if we talk about, say, for example, climate, trade, or global governance? Or are we watching this strategic relationship slowly drifting away?
Many areas, many potential areas for cooperation. For example, climate cooperation remains one of the major areas, and probably it will survive any ongoing geopolitical tensions, which are at all times high. And China has been one of the major proponents of new energy sectors, including, for example, solar energy and wind power. As well as China has been pushing aggressively for adoption of electric vehicles, something that EU enforced tariffs against China-produced EVs to protect its market, but also not everybody in the EU is happy about it. And what will be happening, while EU cannot afford at this point to increase the cost of the international volatility, how it had increased with, let's say, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, with the need to cut down on its energy, it's unlikely to be increasing that cost even further by cutting or reducing its cooperation with China. And in the long run, if the same policy on the part of the United States continues, then we might even see the EU sort of revolt against this kind of policy, and instead of antagonizing the major powers like China, come closer to them, both in terms of trade and maybe addressing some other international issues.
Right, that was Julia from Taylor's University. Thank you so much. It's a situation that we're definitely looking closely here at AWANI International. Right, on to the next news. Shortly after Canada's Liberal Party scored a stunning comeback victory in last week's elections, Prime Minister Mark Carney is set to meet US President Donald Trump at the White House later today. This also comes as China says it is open to improving ties with Canada. Associate Professor Said Khan from Wayne State University weighs in on whether this could mark a turning point for softer diplomacy.
Well, I think that when it comes to Canada, there is going to be a distinction here. Usually what happens is one country will alternate between using the proverbial carrot and the proverbial stick. But now what we find is that China seems perfectly willing to use the carrot, while the United States seems to be much more interested, at least with President Trump, in using the stick. With the election of Prime Minister Carney serve as a moment for negotiation? Will there be a softening of the rhetoric? After all, here you have two countries which have been long-standing allies, sharing the longest contiguous border of any two countries in the world, one that is a very peaceful and a very productive relationship. But the realities now with geopolitics are that if the economics fit, and particularly for a country as vast and as versatile as Canada, when it comes to its natural resources, its raw materials, certainly things that China would crave without the kind of static, the tension, or the nuisance that is coming out of Washington, it seems as though they definitely have the upper hand. One thing that China certainly enjoys is having farmland with resources for whatever food supplies it needs. It has said very recently that it can be completely self-sufficient. It does not have to rely on American imports at all. But certainly it would benefit from Canadian imports to its country if it is able to go ahead and secure that, knowing that, of course, there's quite a bit of Chinese entrepreneurship in Canada, especially some of its major cities like Vancouver and Toronto. That provides a little bit of an edge for Beijing with which to operate. And if that is the case, we may see a shift. It depends on how massive that shift is and how much of that shift may be irreversible when it comes to American efforts, either by Trump or his successors, to salvage the relationship between Ottawa and Washington.
In other news, the European Union will publish plans on Tuesday to ban new Russian gas deals by the end of 2025. This is a part of their plans to phase out existing contracts by 2027.
The bloc had also set a non-binding goal to end Russian fossil fuel imports by 2027, following Moscow's war in Ukraine. The EU has also sanctioned Russian coal and seaborne oil, but not gas, due to opposition from Slovakia and Hungary, which still rely on Russian pipeline supplies. Sanctions require unanimous approval from all 27 EU countries. Russia currently supplies about 19% of Europe's gas, down from 40% before 2022, via Turkstream and LNG shipments. Many European firms remain tied to take-or-pay contracts with Gazprom, meaning paying for gas even if they don't receive it. The Commission is exploring legal ways to let companies exit these contracts without penalties. As part of its strategy to reduce reliance on Russian energy, the European Commission has signaled openness to increase US LNG imports, a move once pushed by President Trump to reduce the EU's trade surplus.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more. Be sure to follow our social media accounts, Power Affairs. This is all for now. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Good night.
Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. In an effort to curb rising medical costs, the government has announced that starting May 1st, all private healthcare facilities are required to publicly display the prices of all medicines they sell, supply or administer. However, this policy has sparked some debate. So tonight on the show, we'll consider how this policy might affect both private healthcare providers and also patients. Joining me on the show is Astro Muhammad Khalib, who is the CEO of the Gallant Center for Health and Social Policy. Astro, welcome to the show. The Gallant Center put out a statement recently saying that the drug price display policy could actually backfire and worsen medical inflation. I was curious about that. Could you elaborate? How do you see this policy doing more harm than good?
Thank you, Melissa. You know, when you look at it from a theoretical standpoint, mandating price display for drugs and medicine in private hospitals, clinics, dentists, and pharmacies could actually inform and empower consumers to, compare out-of-pocket costs and choose lower cost options, and perhaps even introduce competition between healthcare providers. And this enables there to be some sort of management for the prices of pharmaceutical products through free market forces. And that's what we have in Malaysia, free market. And price display isn't new. If you go to a pharmacy today, you see them. They've been doing it for decades. And so displaying prices is a reasonable action, which makes medicine pricing more transparent. I mentioned just now, possibly competitive, as they're currently usually bundled into clinic hospital fees. And you can actually decide whether to fill your prescription at the clinic or hospital or go to a pharmacist. Currently, there's a mistaken assumption that